And here we are back in Kerbal Space Program. Okay, so a long time ago when I first started doing the campaign mode, or the career mode, depending on how you want to look at it, I put this up into orbit around the moon, and then I went ahead and landed on the moon, and then I got back into orbit and realized, sadly, that I was out of fuel, which is a problem. Now, I since went ahead and recovered the poor little Kerbin that was trapped here, and brought him back to Kerbin. It was Jebediah, so good to have Jebediah back at home. The problem, as I said, is that this is now permanently in orbit around the moon, which again, not great. I don't want to have it there. It is annoying. More because I'm a stickler for these sort of things than anything else, but it is annoying to me. So, in the interest of me not being annoyed anymore by the fact that there is something orbiting the moon that really shouldn't be there, because I don't like having things orbiting around for no apparent reason, even though now, after the Sun mission, I most certainly do have a whole bunch of random stuff orbiting around inside of the solar system that I would prefer not to. I have decided that I am going to make a mission to deorbit this. Now, I have tried this before. I have tried to get this thing out of an orbit around the moon. I have sadly failed to do so. And the reason that I have failed to do so is quite simple, really. The reason being, I didn't have the right parts to do it. So, what we're going to do is, using the new Kerbal Space Program parts, we're going to go ahead and deorbit this sucker ourselves. Now, there are multiple ways to do it, but I have come up with an idea that I think is kind of cute, I think is kind of fun. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that. Let's go over to the VAB, and let's build ourselves a rocket. Now, obviously, I'm going to speed all this up. Oh, birdies. How I love you, birdies. Hey, there's the sun. Yeah, but before we go ahead and do this, at some point I really do need to clean up the space system itself, because I can pretty much guarantee you at this point that there is a whole bunch of stuff that shouldn't be out and about in orbit. As you can see, there's debris all over the place around Kerbin and in orbit of Kerbin, and it's frustrating, right? It's just frustrating that we've got all that stuff just flying around for no apparent reason. I will eventually have to go ahead and deorbit some of this stuff. There's some of my stuff from a deep space probe and a sun skimmer and a Mooner Mission Mark IV that apparently has just flown off into there, and more sun debris and more sun skimmer debris, and it's just irritating. So, like I said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build a deorbiter, at least for that moon mission, so that I don't have to see it constantly. Let's get something built. Okay. So yeah, I'll just cut old me out at this point and show you quickly what we're doing here. So that's a little remote guidance unit. That's some RCS right there. And more or less what I'm doing is I'm just setting up the top of it now. It just dropped on the little grabber unit up top there and some RCS thrusters. We're putting on the main amount of fuel that we're going to be using to finalize our orbit and get ourselves near enough to an encounter. And I just mucked up that design there, so I'm restrutting it so I can actually fit the engines in. Also, on top of there, we've got some atmosphere sensors and some barometers, which I think I explain later on in this video, but basically it has to do with the naming of this vehicle, which is a LADEE Wannabe, as you may be able to tell up there in the vehicle naming. It's reference to a NASA mission that, as of today, April 18th, 2014, is no longer, because they smashed it into the moon. And there's various reasons for that, but basically they don't want to contaminate the orbits of the moon, so they destroyed their mission. Because it was pretty much in a permanent orbit. And that's more or less what I'm doing with this mission. As you can see, I'm just, finalizing the little rocket design here, putting on the last few bits, setting up asparagus staging on the bottom there, putting some SAS there for extra control, and, putting those little launch platform thingamajiggers in there. I'm also going to add in another remote control unit to that bottom stage so that I can return that to orbit and again not contaminate anything. So yeah, let's go ahead and launch this sucker. Let's see what we can do with it. So now we enter into the testing phase, which is always fun. And as we are always prone to do, we are going to tee this sucker up. We're going to put our resources into stage only mode. We are going to move into here and move ourselves there. And put the nav ball on. Wicked. We're good. Okay, cool. Throttle up. Fire away. And that thing lifts off like a bat out of hell, which is pretty much exactly what I expected. It also burns fuel at a colossal rate. So hopefully, I have staged this thing properly. Hopefully, this will not consume fuel too quickly and we'll be able to get it into orbit. We're going to find out soon enough, but either way, this should be relatively interesting. We also may want to consider reinforcing this because it is a wobble-tastic. Look at how it wobbles. So many thrust. So very many thrust. At least it is wobbling in the appropriate direction, more or less. Yeah. This is going great. Oh boy. Okay, well, we could always not launch at full colossal speed, I suppose. What kind of an orbit do we have here? Oh my god, that is amazing. Okay, well, you know, I mean, it's wobbling in the right direction, so that's good. Yup. Whee! That is amazing! Okay. 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 I don't even know what direction I'm going in anymore. That's too good. So... Okay. Well... That is not quite what we wanted. Let's, let us attempt now to bring this slightly more in the direction that we would like it to be in. Yeah. That, by the way, frickin' great launch. Loving it. Absolutely loving it. Holy crap. That was amazing. Okay. We are a minute out from apoapse. We are readjusting our velocity vector, and we're just trying to pull this up to this line here, more or less, so that we can get roughly into the same orbital plane that we are looking for. This is coming up, which is great. And once we get that more or less in the correct orientation, we will stop our burn. Something like that. And just bring up the burn a little bit more here. We're pretty much reached orbit already, which is kind of wonderful. Yeah, so we're just gonna try to get that there, and then we'll go ahead and we will burn prograde and more or less circularize the orbit at this point. We can do some final adjustments afterwards, but I think that we are gonna be pretty okay on fuel. That was an amazing launch. I am shocked that this thing didn't tear itself apart, but also thoroughly pleased that it didn't. Yeah, so we're coming up to our maximum orbit, our apoapse at 91 kilometers, which is great. Our orbital speed, of course, is dropping, but that's also fine. We're just going to let ourselves approach apoapse, and I think at about the 30-second mark, 30-second marks out, 30 seconds out from the node, 30 seconds, seconds, so many seconds. There are so many seconds to consider in this game. About 30 seconds away from the node itself, we're going to go ahead and, again, adjust the orbit slightly up, because as we can see here, we're not quite above where we want to be. So we'll use this burn not only to get our orbit circularized, we're also going to use this to get this end of the orbit up a little bit, this end of the orbit down a little bit, again just by, slightly burning above this line here. That should bring us to where we need to be. So, orbital speed that we need to achieve is about 2150, and we are about 10 seconds away. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start the burn. Alright. So our apoaps obviously is going up. Orbital speed is increasing. Our periaps should have appeared at more or less at that point there. And what we'll do is we're just going to now... We're going to now... Come here. Add a maneuver, and we're just going to circularize this orbit a little bit. Great. 107, 102, 5 kilometer difference. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. Now we could go ahead and adjust the orbital plane. The other thing that I need to mention here is that this is orbiting around this way. Right? Right? Okay, you'll see that in just a second. Actually, let's just switch to the craft so you can see what I'm seeing here. So the other problem with this particular thing, no, is that it is orbiting around the moon in this fashion here, right? We are orbiting around Kerbin in this fashion here. So we have to reverse this thing's orbit so that it comes out, and instead of orbiting around this way, it orbits around this way. Which should be kind of interesting. Okay, so let's switch back. And let's go ahead. I guess first what we should probably be thinking about here is some kind of an adjustment thereabouts. More or less even this out to roughly 0 degrees. Okay, at roughly the 5-second mark, we will commence our burn. Right about there. Great. And that probably a little bit too much, but that's okay. What does that actually give us now? 0.1 and negative 0.1. That's pretty darn good. So now we've got our target of the moon. And we need to do this fairly carefully. We're gonna set our node roughly there, I guess. And we're going to burn out. We're just going to try to get ourselves into more or less, yeah, something like that. Now what we want to do is have a look over here and see what's actually going to happen when we do that. See, now this is more or less going to get us the way that we want to be. We're going to come in front of the moon, we're going to wrap around the back more or less, and wind up in an orbit that we want. Of course, there's going to be some final adjustments that we need to make once we get out. This is a relatively long burn, 36-second burn. Should theoretically have enough fuel to do it. This, I don't know if I can possibly deorbit in time. Hopefully we'll be able to deorbit it, but we'll see. Let's maneuver this over to where we need to be. Ready, steady, go. Okay, now again, I don't know if we are necessarily going to have enough fuel or not. It looks like we probably will, honestly. And then what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to deorbit this afterwards. Right? That seem reasonable to everyone? It seems reasonable to me. And yeah, something like that. Let's see what that's given us. That has given us pretty good orbit in the end. Yep. We're actually going to collide with the moon, considering this orbit. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to come back in here, and we are going to decouple, right? And then we're going to switch over to this craft here, and we are going to turn this sucker around, and we're just going to burn retrograde like crazy at this point. And what that in theory should do is modify our orbit. We're just going to keep on burning retrograde basically. And hopefully what that will do is bring us down into the atmosphere at some point. Yep, which does. Wonderful. So now this little guy over here will eventually be colliding with Kerbin itself. And its sister is heading off for the moon. The LADEE wannabe is on its way. This guy over here will eventually collide with the surface of Kerbin, Kersmash, and we're good to go. Now what I want to do here, first, why can't I switch between? No nearby objects to focus. Use map view to select distant ones. Okay. Apparently this is already distant. Let's switch to this. Oh, right. It is no longer throttled up. We can now switch. Okay, so for this little guy, it's got its own engines, it's got its own RCS, and what we're going to do is along this guy's orbit, we're just going to modify the orbit slightly. And add a maneuver here, and we're going to modify the orbit ever so slightly so that we actually have a periapse on this side, right? We're going to make sure that this doesn't actually collide with the moon. And actually, the way that this is looking right now, it might not. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So, we now have a moon periapse, which is way too effing high. But it is a periapse nonetheless. Let's go ahead and just gently bring that down to, oh, say, whoop, 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 whoop. Don't want to modify that too much. Let's bring that to, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Okay, so we've got that maneuver set up. Let's just align ourselves along it. It's a very small maneuver, about 9 meters per second of delta V that we need to change out there, which is not a problem at all. We're barely going to use any fuel doing it. Let's just find our target, get that set up, and then we're going to follow the launch stage back down to Kerbin itself. Okay, so that's more or less lined up the way that we want it to be. One last thing that we probably should be doing at this point is just extending these panels out so that it still has some electrical charge, and this should start going up at some point here. There we go. Electrical charge is increasing now. That's wonderful. Cool. We have ourselves the LADEE wannabe, otherwise known as the deorbiter. Great. let's go ahead and switch back to its sister system, switch 2. And let's see what happens as this thing falls into the atmosphere. Cool. It exploded. And that, dear friends, is how we deal with old ships that we no longer need the parts for. Wonderful. We did it. Moving right along. Whoops. Nope, don't really want the flight results for that. Hey. I want to switch to that. Dang it. Okay, fine. Go back to Space Center. Let's go ahead and zoom ourselves back into our LADEE wannabe. Okay. So, as I said, we have about an 8.9 meter per second burn that we need to be doing. We need to be doing it in about an hour or so. Let's bring that down ever so slightly. And by ever so slightly, I mean by a lot. Okay, that's gotten it down to about 10 minutes. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, I don't know how long I actually need to burn for, but considering where we are, I don't think it will be for all that long. So I'm going to say we'll start the burn at about 5 seconds. 5 seconds out from the node. That should be pretty darn good, I think. And we're about 20 seconds out, and we're about 10 seconds out. So let's get ready for the burn. And let's start this burn. Ooh. Whoa! We went way too far there. Nuts. Well, butts. Whew. Okay. You know what we can do? In the interest of not being positioned way, way too high above the surface of the moon, let's just burn retrograde a little bit, and let's adjust that down to approximately the height that we want to be at, which I believe is about 15 kilometers above the surface, more or less. Again, not completely sure about that. Might not be, but that should be good enough. There. Woof. Okay. That's fine. We can make final course adjustments afterwards. 9 kilometers should be okay. Should be, in theory, what we want. So, let's go back to this view, because it's pretty. And let's just watch ourselves come towards the moon. We're leaving Kerbin behind. Bye-bye, Kerbin. We're going to set ourselves up a maneuver at Apoapse. Periapse, excuse me. Add maneuver. We're just going to burn retrograde until we have a captured orbit.